Record. Hey class, thank you so much for tuning in. I have a really special guest on very short notice. As some of you may or may not know, there is a new crisis that happened in the state of Texas in regards to social work. And while we are not in Texas, it definitely has a ripple effect to social workers in Kansas and Missouri and every state in the United States. Joined with me is a very good friend of mine, Dr. Jamaal Fortner, who is a social worker in Houston. And I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you all a little bit himself. And then we're going to have a discussion and a debate and kind of get you up to speed with this crisis that has occurred at the policy and macro level in Texas.
All right. Hey, folks. My name is Jamaal, Dr. Jamaal Fortner. You can call me Doc J. I am a medical social worker as well as a therapist and inpatient counselor for inpatient psych as well as for a community hospital. So I kind of have a little bit of a firm grasp on what's happening out there. And also I produce some blogs and all that good stuff. And yeah, man, I'm just out there trying to help the people. I'm your local neighborhood hope dealer. That's what I do.
All right. You got your hope bracelet, Jamaal?
I do. I still have it. I actually wore it to work a few days ago.
You got a special spot in my heart, right there, all at all times.
Man, I was rocking it at work the other day. Somebody was like, "What is that?" I was like, "Yeah, man, this is what I do. It's my superpower."
So in Texas last week, the board of Texas, the licensing board, voted unanimously to allow social workers to turn away gay and lesbian clients and clients with disabilities. And from what I can tell, the Attorney General told the licensing board that they need to get their licensing regs in line with the state laws. But there's been a lot of changes in licensing in the state of Texas, and I'm going to let Jamaal share with you kind of what has occurred in the last 6 to 9 months, give or take some months.
Okay. So here in Texas, social workers have always been governed by the Texas State Board of Social Work Examiners. And that has been the norm up until about this past summer, when it was decided that the boards that govern LPCs, the boards that govern general psychologists and social workers would all be merged into one board that's going to be called the Texas Behavioral Health Executive Council. So with that being said, now you have LPCs and other psychologists also overseeing social workers. Also, if you look at the makeup and you see the composition of the executive part of that board, there aren't many social workers on it, if any at all. And also, they've been making changes as to how our licensing comes about, even in the sense of now you don't have to have your job description reviewed prior to applying for clinical supervision. So you have people who are kind of being set up for failure when they're going to apply for clinical supervision, but they're in jobs that don't allow for any real clinical work. It'll be more case management type jobs, but they're going for clinical licensure. So with that being the case, you've seen like a very interesting shift away from the clinical background that they used to ask for to the clinical background that they're asking for now. And so everything is like now this government attempt at being maybe more hands off is the way they're trying to spin all of this. However, it really just seems like a means by which to put a whole bunch of offices together, hopefully cut out some positions and some salaries, and then move forward. I think the profession, our profession, is going to kind of suffer as a result of it, and I think you're going to be seeing a lot less successful attempts when it comes down to passing the final clinical exam.
Well, and it clearly creates a giant elephant in the room, and that is, how can a psychologist or a counselor determine the competency of a social worker, nor how could I determine the competency of a psychologist or an LPC? That brings up all sorts of competency issues, and that may have led to what has occurred in regards to allowing social workers to turn away gay and lesbian clients as well as clients with disabilities. Before we get into that specific, one of the things that struck me really, and I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this, we don't know how many people voted. We don't know the size. When you look online, it looks like there's 9 board members, but that doesn't mean we know who voted, who was part of that decision. But the one thing that I read was it was unanimous. There wasn't one person that dissented, that said, you know, man, this doesn't sound right. I'm going to have to go with what is best. And I just think that's so interesting. What are your thoughts, Dr. J, on the fact there was no dissension?
I think honestly, this is another situation where when you look at the composition of this board, I don't recall there being a whole situation where it's like, oh, we can vote on this, or we are gonna send representatives to this. This was like a lot of people who seem to just be appointed. And my concern is when you have someone like the governor that we have, I'll just put it like that, appointing people, uh, they're going to appoint people that they know will do what they want them to do. So as if you look through the board, like almost everyone is an LPC, and almost all of them are people who have worked with the governor. So I believe the presiding officer has worked with him for literally multiple years now. Her second in command at one point was appointed by the governor to this board that she sits on. So I doubt that if they're appointed by the governor, what they're not going to do is turn around and go against something that he's recommending.
Right. And then subsequently, you have the failure of best practice and the failure of human-centered practice. So when this came out, besides probably falling out of your chair, um, what's been the the impact that you felt with your peers in the social work community?
So I think, and speaking with a lot of former coworkers and current coworkers, it's been that idea, especially for social workers, that this is, diametrically opposed to what we're taught. And it goes against what most of us feel is our NASW code of ethics. Now we're being told, or we're being made to believe that, oh, well, this was made to bring your code of ethics in line with the state laws. And so I felt like, okay, so what you're basically saying is, hey, the state says it's okay to discriminate against these people, so it's okay for you guys to discriminate against these people. But the question was, did you have a lot of social workers coming to you voicing, like, hey, I had to speak to this gay couple today and I didn't like that, or hey, I had to speak to this disabled person and I didn't like that. It's more like this is just another way of spreading division that is unnecessary. Why would you do this in a helping profession like ours? Are you also going to tell doctors it's okay to not treat a patient because because they belong to some minority group that you don't agree with? Like, that's questionable to me.
I think you really rake a really great point, make a great point, rake it across the coals, and that is they didn't seek out what social workers, what their opinion was. They just made this decision. And I would hate to know a social worker that would truly feel it would be okay. I think at that point, that's a failure of their degree and a failure of clinical supervision and a failure to grow, because we all have biases. We all have those. But to grow through them and to learn how to be caring and kind and empathetic and respectful of the human condition, but to just make a decision without thinking about the ramifications or how the people who are licensed would even feel about it. Um, you know,
Definitely, I think, but that also speaks to Governor Abbott's character. I mean, and again, this is not like a political jab or anything, but that this is the kind of decisions that he tends to make. They're usually very unilateral, and it comes with very little resistance. So even when he makes decisions, for example, limiting things like, oh, I'm limiting the number of ballot drop boxes. It's that sense of there's never a thought given to the wider ramifications of what you're doing. You're just doing something just to say I did X, Y, or Z versus doing it so as to appeal to the greater good or to open accessibility for more people. It's always kind of like I want to limit something. And I don't understand why that is with him. In particular, this rule feels so strange because you're saying, okay, well, people in the social work profession can no longer refuse to see clients. They well now can refuse to see clients based on their disability, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So it's like the disability one hits pretty hard because it's like, has anyone noticed that he's in a wheelchair and he's wheelchair bound? So it's like, okay, if you went to a social worker and they refused to see you, how would that make you feel?
Wow, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I, you know, one of the things that I think about it, one of the things that I teach when I teach practice is competency, right? And when I'm doing clinical supervision, it's about growing competency. And honestly, working with, you know, um, certain populations might require some competency. For instance, I tell all my students I'm not a substance abuse guy. I never wanted to do substance abuse. It was never going to be my area of expertise. So I'm not competent in it. So if I was it's doing your assessment and I could smell alcohol on you, and you've told me that your biggest problem is getting smashed every weekend, I'm not competent. So I'm not turning you away because of the person you are. I'm saying I can't treat that. So I'm going to send you to the best person who's most competent in substance abuse, but I'm still going to practice human centered care, care and concern, have empathy. And it's not based on a bias, it's based on a competency. So now this law is based, allows it to be based on a bias, has nothing to do with competency.
And the thing is, it's like even if you look at the thing about it is the way this law is worded and designed, it not only falls out of line with NASW ethics, but it violates non-discrimination laws federally. It's kind of like saying, okay, so are we just completely throwing away, I think it's what, Title IX?
Mm.
Are we just completely throwing that away now? And we're saying, okay, it's okay, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. We just want to make sure that you know that you're okay to refuse these people service. And I really feel like this is something that was done in, another attempt at riling that division and riling that segment of his supporters who would want to discriminate against people with disabilities or gender identity issues or sexual orientation. The Houston Metroplex, alongside the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, has some of the highest numbers of trans people. So to specifically point out gender identity is not by accident. This was done intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You hit a home run. It's absolutely against Title IX. It's absolutely against Title IX. So this is some uh, this is some heartbreaking, but really interesting when we think about policy and we think about connecting theory to practice. It's interesting, and I'm curious where we think it's going to go. Do you think it's going to get overturned? I mean,
I
it may be too soon to say. I know there's some write-in campaigns. I know our colleague, I got an email from Dr. Lakia Cherry that she is supporting a write-in to support social workers in Texas. So I'm curious what's going to occur.
Well, I think, the Texas chapters of the NASW are very active, and they have jumped on board with saying, you know what, we have to do something about this. I believe Lambda Legal also has definitely kicked up a big deal about this because they want to begin litigation, I think, against the governor's office. You have a lot of pro-LGBTQ community organizations that are also, pushing against this because this is one of those times where it's kind of like, let's take away maybe our religious beliefs, or let's take away our personal beliefs and look at this simply as people. Is it ever okay to just deny someone care based on, you know, something about them. In particular, like if you took out the gender identity and sexual orientation and just looked at disability, people will argue up and down whether or not gender identity and whether sexual orientation are a choice. That's okay, fine. But who chose to be disabled?
Right. To be in a wheelchair.
Yeah, it's like, who made that choice? So, with that being the case, how can you now justify, oh, well, I don't have to, help you. You can go somewhere else. It's like, that's not okay. And I feel like if this is the type of board that we have sitting over, our licensure, this is a very questionable space to be in. It will, I feel like if it continues in this way, will this affect our ability as Texas social workers to go to other states? Will other states honor our licensure when, they're like, oh, well, in Texas, you don't even have to serve people who fall outside of these realms. Like, is that even like, you know, is that something that you normally practice or no? And I feel like a lot of social workers are not happy about that. And I feel like that sense of discrimination is definitely not going to be tolerated.
Well, the one thing, and I think we have to wrap up here. I know we could talk all night, but class, I promised Dr. J I would not take up more than 20 minutes of his time. But the one thing is that all of us have to use our voice. Our voice, whether it's to vote, whether it's to write an op-ed piece, whether it's to join a committee, to get appointed to a board, to challenge policy. We all have to use our voice. And in essence, connecting with Dr. J, who's deep down in the bottom of Texas, I'm wanting his voice to be heard in Missouri. We've got to use our voice and stand up for what's right and for what's decent.
Definitely. God, like honestly, for all the budding social workers out there, do whatever is comfortable for you to do to affect change. For some people, that's galvanizing others to get the ball rolling. For some people, that's donating money, writing in, whatever it takes. But as a social worker, you are always going to be standing in the gap for those who will always be voiceless. There's always going to be the downtrodden, the voiceless, the minorities. You have to stand in that gap for them. They may not listen to those people because maybe they're uneducated, maybe they don't have the resources or the right words to use to speak that truth to power. But it's our responsibility, it's our duty, it's what we're called to do. We are the superheroes in this situation, and we have to stand up for everybody who cannot stand up for themselves. You know, I tell you guys all the time, man, I'm your local neighborhood hope dealer. That's what I do.
That's right.
Like, we
And
got to.
doing what's right is not always easy, but the one thing it always is, Dr. J, it's right. Doing what's right is always right.
Yeah, and I think it was Maya Angelou who said, doing what's right may not be expedient, and it may not be, financially motivating, but it will soothe your soul. And doing right will give you a protection and a peace that guns and security guards cannot buy for you. Do what's right because there's never a wrong time to do what's right. I think that's MLK. But I mean, don't quote me on that.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Hey, thank you, class. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of time with my good friend, Dr. J. And thank you so much.
Awesome.